Fisk, and I was wondering what kind of film he wanted you to make.
Yes, I think it was similar. I think he was very, we set some ground rules up for the production process, and one of those rules was this was a film about journalism, a film about a journalist. There would be no second takes. It was not going to be the kind of cinema verite observational film where you have that opportunity to do that kind of filming. So it was very much established that it's something we missed. You had to go for it and get it. I think that he was very hands-off. That was the other agreement, that I had full editorial control, and he didn't see the film until we premiered it in Toronto in September. So that was important as well. I mean, I think he, as you see in the film, and I think it's something I learned over the course of working with him over the past few years, was that contrary to a lot of the, the mythology around Robert Fisk, because you can Google search his name and you can find all sorts of things about him, as he talks about briefly in the film. But contrary to that, I found that what endeared him to me was his integrity, and how he holds that as so strongly, and he doesn't veer from that. And as a result, as that being his direction, he's very clear on what is right and what is wrong for him. And so it was wrong if we were to, if he were to have an opinion in the film. That was wrong. And he knew, and he knows, he's very self-aware about what critics think about him, and he's, which oftentimes would be the problem, because he would tell me, like, oh, you cannot film me, you can't film a shot of a bed behind me, because then people would make an assumption that, I don't know what it is, but, that he's, so, in fact, it didn't matter in the end. We did, he didn't want to be shown in his pajamas, but we actually got a shot of him in his pajamas. So I think that was a matter of building that kind of rapport with him and that sort of trust. So we were able to get there with that. So generally, I think that was it. He was hands-off.
And what kind of feedback did he give you on the film after he saw it at the premiere?
Well, you've heard something like the other night. He was saying that he likes to joke, I hope, that he can't handle it. He can't stand hearing himself waffle on and on and on and talk and talk and talk. But he took me aside, and I think he was quite. I mean, here's somebody who spent 40+ years as a journalist, and I think it can be quite something to have a filmmaker kind of try to encapsulate what that means in a movie. And I think he's been quite, dare I say, moved by the film, and I think he's supportive of the end result. So it's great, yeah.
He's somebody who's used to reporting only with his notes and his pen, and you were there with your camera, and I guess some kind of minimal crew at least. So yeah. What was it like for him, for you, and for the people around? Yeah,
it was not at all. It wasn't always easy, and primarily because he is a paper pen reporter. To have a camera with him was very disjointing for his ability to have access to people and to conduct his work unfiltered. It's easier when he's alone, basically. So having a camera was not always totally easy with him, and we had to really work on. I mean, in documentary filmmaking, you try at all possibilities when you can to sort of like slow it down a little bit, but with Fisk, it was go, go, go. So you can imagine we're constantly trying to chase the moment, and that's not always fun. But I think as a result, I've learned that it is possible, and there is an aliveness that comes with that, and it suits very well the story of the journalist. No, we joke around about it. I mean, he would always complain that we were so slow and slowing him down, and I think he has an anecdote though about realizing that he was incorrect in a way when he ran out of ink in a pen, and he realized, oh, you kind of need. You need the ink and the pen to do your work. You need film and the camera to do your filming. So I think he came back a little bit with that comment.
And your cameraman is Iraqi himself, right?
Iraqi-Canadian, fantastic cinematographer, Duraid Munajim, who I went to school with here at Concordia many years ago. He went on to shoot B units for all of Catherine Bigelow's films, you know, and he's a fantastic cinematographer, a film cinematographer. He uses, you know, film in a camera, so that to me was very important. Very sensitive, good listener, and we got along.
First of all, how did you get to him to agree to do this film? Did you know him before? Did you just call him and say, hey, I would like to film you? And second of all, do you think that making a documentary like you did is kind of like being a journalist, or do you completely separate the two?
Great questions. The first one, I was sort of, you know, the producers, so it was Anita Lee of the National Film Board and Nelofer Pazira, the producer who contacted me about making a film about Robert Fisk, because they had seen some of my work, and I think they saw Up the Yangtze, for example, as an interesting film, and a filmmaking approach that was maybe conducive to interpreting the world of Robert Fisk. And I think the other factor was that they wanted someone who didn't bring the baggage of a Middle East filmmaker, you know, who would, you know, maybe potentially sort of have a very strong point of view in something there or the other. And I think they purposely found the Chinese Canadian who doesn't know much about the Middle East to come in and make a film about the Middle East. For me, it was eye-opening. I mean, I enter my filmmaking with a certain curiosity, and I think I make films that kind of go all over the place. I made a film about exotic fruit. So, you know, I think I'm interested in learning about places and people, and certainly this one was about journalism, primarily. So, yeah, I know of his work. I had read his work post September 11th. I followed his work on Z Magazine and you know, Chomsky, Fisk. You know, there's a bunch of writers at the time, Edward Said, you know, that I was following because I wanted to understand a little more what was happening at the time. And I sort of stopped in the interim for a while, and then this came up, and it suddenly jolted me awake. And it directly resulted because I was working on a film, an anthology film about the American election in November 8th, 2016. I was in Vermont with a bunch of filmmakers across the U.S., and we were following 24 hours in the election. And at 9 p.m., I was following this leftist, socialist, off-the-grid Vermont character, you know, and he just didn't care. He said, 9 p.m. it's over, Clinton won. And we went to bed. And the next day, we woke up, and I turned my phone on, and there was a barrage of messages from my American wife. And she was almost, at that time, 8 months pregnant, and I thought she was going through labor. And she was just distraught. And then I realized something that didn't compute in the connection between what was being reported and what ended up being the results of that election. And I think that serendipitously connected to my feelings at that time of connecting to a story about Robert Fisk, connecting to this idea of my lack of media literacy. And for my child's future, I think about that often, you know. And I think it's important that we have a way to find, to navigate information, which there's too much of right now. We need to find answers. And it's, you know, in this film, it's Robert Fisk's truth. You know, everyone has a point of view, and I think that's important to acknowledge that we do take a point of view. And I think, and that was the lesson there. You had a second question.
Are you a journalist yourself?
Oh yeah, you know, I think I'm, you know, I'm not a journalist, and but I think the sort of the edicts that we, you know, put before us to make this film were journalistic, because we had to have a certain integrity in order not to, you know, put ourselves in that corner where we could be vulnerable to criticism like that. So we were very, very careful in the editing and in the construction of the film to pursue it in a journalistic way. But I myself, I think I call myself a storyteller, and I think that's what I think primarily and I think you know, in documentary filmmaking, I think there's a very much an alignment with maybe what Robert Fisk believes as his definition of reporting. You know, on the side of those who suffer. You know, in that way, very subjective. And I think as documentary filmmakers, we come into it with that similar perspective. It's subjective filmmaking. We have a sort of a direction we want to go in, and it's the opportunity in a feature-length film to sort of carve out a longer sort of idea. And it's not trying to be heavy-handed with a message. I think we're trying to just present an idea and leave you with the afterthought. That when you leave the cinema, hopefully you will debate together, you know, Duma, you'll debate some of Robert Fisk's ideas. You know, you'll see his character come through in the movie, that he's not a perfect person by far, a big personality, and I think that's what drives him through with his journalism. So yeah, the story.
Very last part of the movie sort of says, well, it's
pointless.
Yeah, like, well, whatever I've talked in the movie, it's pointless. Like my life as a journalist.
So that's a good question. From the storyteller's point of view, I think what I saw in his character was someone who began his career as very idealistic, and in the end became, you know, at his age now, with everything going on that's overwhelming in the world to him at this very moment, slightly jaded about his effect. And he says it very clearly in the movie. I think what I took home as maybe a more optimistic note was this idea that the least a journalist can do is to keep a record so that nobody forgets. And I think that to me, as a sort of as the reporter historian that Robert Fisk is, I think that to me is what is necessary. If he, you know, if for Duma, for example, if Idlib, for example, I mean, I think if you go back and look at that today, I think it still carries through what he had done only a couple of years ago, but that became, you know, gets buried with the barrage of information that we receive. So I think he's changed as a journalist, just having gone through the years he has. But I do think he has but at the end of the day, he still pushes forward. He's still reporting. He's still coming out with his book, next book. He's on page 1500 of a volume called Night of Power, and it's the next after Great War for Civilization. Is Night of Power, and so he keeps going. He keeps keeping.
How did you go about having the permission to film in that area, that settlement, especially? I imagine the authorities knew the reputation of Fisk, and also knew that Suleiman probably had been dispossessed.
So we arrived in Israel. The first thing you do, and this is new for me because I usually don't go through this process, but we enter as journalists and we go to get our press passes. So that's the first step. Of course, they know what you're doing. We tried to get press passes to Gaza, but we were refused. But Robert Fisk received that pass. So in the end, we didn't go to Gaza to film. It was just, well, we couldn't. But Suleiman's story was something that we wanted to follow up on. All of the instances you see in the movie where we're going out and we're following Robert, chasing a story, whether it be in Bosnia or with Suleiman, for example, we didn't know what we would be getting into. So it was very much, you know, just going with it, flying by the seat of your pants, and we go in and so what you don't see in the film is that we had to find Suleiman first. It took a few, you know, stages, like he did with Ifet Kurnich, which we also condensed. But within the matter of a couple hours, you know, in the process of looking for these characters that he wanted to find. And so we found Suleiman very quickly and did the interview, went out, same day, went over to, you know, to his former home. And what you see in the film actually happened. You know, it was his first time there. Robert says, you know, if you're not comfortable, we won't go. We didn't know what would happen. In fact, it was very quiet. The storyteller part of me wished that maybe we had an interaction with a settler, but we didn't, and that's basically what happened. And I find that the moment in the film is quite moving because of the lack of people in it, and it's very much just Robert and Suleiman and his reminiscences of that time that passed. Yeah.
Congratulations on a really powerful film, powerfully told story.
Yeah, thank you.
For a non-journalist, I think you do a pretty good job. I have two questions. One is you had a lot of archival footage, a lot of, and in particular, the one that interested me was where you went to the weapons manufacturer in, I guess it was Bosnia or Serbia. Yeah. And somebody was filming, hidden camera, low down, and got into, and it was a pretty significant and remarkable piece of journalism. Just that part of it. I wonder if you could tell the story of that and some of the other archival footage that you used from long ago. I suspect that some of those films were taken when you were a boy, or even. The other question I had is that we don't learn very much about Robert Fisk's personal life. We know he was married, but did he have children? We never saw his wife. We don't know much about his background except his childhood. And I wonder, I mean, obviously that seems to me it was deliberate. He didn't want to have much about his personal life there. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about what the backstory there was. Thanks.
I'll start with the second question. Yeah, he's a very private person as a public journalist. I think he's very careful about how he's represented privately. And in the beginning, I tried to push that and wanted to film with his partner and just kind of get there with the story. But in the amount of time that we had to make the actual 100+ minute film, I think it would have segued away from the essential what we wanted to say. And I think this film is more akin to sort of an essay film rather than like sort of a walk through the life of and then what would happen essentially is you tilt more into that biography, and we didn't want to do that. I think by comparison, one of the model films that I was inspired by was Noam Chomsky's film from a few years ago, Manufacturing Consent. And that film is similar. There's nothing too much about the family, just a little bit, but mostly about his ideas. That's what I wanted to do. In regards to Bosnia, that was a sequence that that hidden camera footage, I mean, that happened live as we were filming. We were very, you see it unfolding. Could have ended up a very dangerous situation. And so the camera person, Duraid, went in with his camera at his side, rolling. I had an assistant with a camera, a cell phone camera, and Robert was already mic'd up. So they went in together, and I was in the van. I was filming exterior. And they go in, I could hear everything. So they go in, and and Duraid puts the camera on the table, and it's rolling. Because he's a cinematographer, he's framing all the time, and so he just sort of has a sensibility for where to frame it. And believe it or not, we got, at the end of this whole thing, we actually got a release form signed by the manager. So the hidden camera thing didn't really, I wondered, we pushed it, we probably could have just, shouldered camera. We could have probably gone and done it, but no, that was how that happened. In terms of archive, there were 3 crucial pieces of film that we needed, and early on I knew that would be the sort of some of the footage we really wanted to have. And one of them was the BBC documentary Reporter from 1974, I believe, about Robert during the Troubles. The second was a documentary that he made 3-part series for Channel 4 called Beirut to Bosnia, sort of charting the arc of the fomenting anger in the Middle East. And really in '93, he ends with this note about something's going to happen, In '93, he said that. And I don't think we included it in the film. We had it in there, but anyway. So then the third film that we had was a documentary about the Times of London, that's where the Rupert Murdoch comment about the horns and the thing. So we knew going into the production that I wanted to find a way to use that and build it into the film, but had no sense of the structure of the movie, because actually part of it was we didn't know how it would come together. That going back and forth from present to past had to happen organically. Similar in a way to how Robert will take you on a tour of Beirut or anywhere. Walking down a street, he will point out the past intertwining with the present, going all the way back to the Roman Empire. And to me that was very inspiring, that the film could do similar in a way. I was inspired by that idea, going past to present. but seamlessly, organically, building and rolling, you know, every theme out. It just kind of rolls. I feel like the film just rolls and rolls into the next theme, and it shouldn't feel very apparent that we're going into another theme. It should just be continuous. And that was something that I worked very long and hard with a fantastic editor from Toronto named Mike Munn, who is the editor of a great film called Stories We Tell by Sarah Polley. And just that ability to be able to wield this organic, and he also cut Picture of Light, Peter Mettler's documentary. It's a fantastic editor. It's not a one-person game of filmmaking. This was a team, from the producers to the editor to my cinematographer, everyone that worked on it. So I stand here alone, but I know the impact of that process. It took 1 year to edit the film. So.
Hey, this is Eric from IONCINEMA.com. If you want to support us, subscribe below. For more reviews, interviews, film festival coverage from Sundance, Cannes, Toronto, you want to check out these guys on this side.